my name is Parisey Tariq and you're watching DBTV Exclusive. In recent times, the focus of future studies has seen a shift. Efforts have now been focused less on getting the future particularly right and more on creating reflective, adaptable learning organizations and cultures. We have with us an expert in the study of alternative futures, the worldviews and the myths that underlie them. Sohail Inayatullah is the UNESCO Chair in Future Studies and a professor at the Tamkang University in Taiwan. He is the author of over 300 scientific articles and book chapters and has authored and edited over 20 books. He has worked extensively with governments, international corporations, and non-governmental organizations around the globe to re-author their futures. Sohail, thank you so much for joining us. So what would you say has caused this shift from predicting accurate futures to creating innovative futures?
The wave in future studies in the 60s was very much around prediction. Let's predict the future. There was huge incentives from financial firms to better predict. That turned out by the 70s to say, actually, we're getting the predictions wrong. So then the next wave was scenarios. We can't predict the future, but let's come up with alternatives. So that was quite powerful because there's not one future, there's many futures. After doing that for a while, the issue became, okay, I understand the operating environment, but do I have the capability to change it? So a project I've been working on for the last few years is with major law enforcement. So they're keen to understand how is the global operating environment changing in terms of futures of crime. So say you figure that out, then so what? So you have a better sense of the trends, but can you do something about them? So that the more important thing became, how do I influence the future? What's my capacity, my ability to shape the future? So we've gone from prediction to alternatives to how do I enhance my personal ability, our national ability, and in fact, the global ability to create or to co-create alternative futures.
Okay. Now you have this new book coming out called Asia 2038 that speaks about disruptions that point towards new possibilities for Asia. Can you tell us more about that?
So the book has a number of purposes. One was to say, again, as you suggested earlier, it's not about prediction. How do we start to imagine the new Asia? So part of it is, here's a possible Asian vision of 2038. The other part was to say, okay, let's look at some of the data, what's novel, what's disruptive. So we're using emerging issues analysis, which is, let's not focus on the problems which we know, right? Or even the trends which we know. What are some disruptions 10, 20 years that could totally change the game? So we identified about 10 of those, and we did it for one national government. Their Prime Minister's office says, give us a sense of the social futures of Asia. So that book was written for them, and then later they said we can have the IP and just publish it publicly.
Okay, and one of those disruptions is, I think the last one, Asia, an Asia that says yes to itself.
Yeah, the old imagination of Asia was resisting or fighting against how the West constructed Asia. So it's always either fighting against the West or imitating the West. So we look at Asian cities, they're all following the Western model of Los Angelization. I love my car versus I love my community. We put money in roads instead of money in creating integrated communities where everything is nearby. So it's very much the used future of the Western imagination. The alternative is the Asian imagination that says, yes, wait a second, we have historical resources, we have population, we have labor, we have new technologies. Why don't we actually imagine our own future? So this is a wonderful movie, Black Panther. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah.
And the crucial part actually is not the person of the Black Panther, it's Wakanda. Wakanda is the space, the country in which he exists. And Wakanda is unique because it's Afrofuturism. It's saying, let's not use models of possibility from the Western imagination. Let's go to the roots of the African imagination and now imagine a new civilization that includes spirituality, that includes ancestors, that includes deep respect for nature, and brings in artificial intelligence. What would that look like? So it's the Wakanda of the future. So this book starts to say, well, what would Wakanda, what would an Asian futurism look like? And how can we start to imagine a new Asia? Primarily for that, of course, has to be an Asia that says yes to itself.
Okay. So what do the current trends suggest? Is Asia looking at less or more disruptions in the coming decades?
There's a term one of my teachers used. He says, we're entering galloping time. Galloping time means the nature of the time keeps on increasing. It's exponential time. In this type of time, the rate of change keeps on changing. whether artificial intelligence, CRISPR in terms of genomics, population, rise of women. This is not a stable period in human history. It's a radical disruption in human history. Now, the fantastic part of that, when you have this galloping time, the nature of your ability to influence also increases. When things are stable, what can I do, right? One person can't change stuff. When things are malleable, one person can do a lot. Communities who have a focused intent, a focused vision, they have a greater ability to change the future. That can be for the good or for the bad. So malleable time, plastic time, or galloping time, this puts us in a position where the rate of change in itself is changing.
Okay, so considering that, what does the rise of women and the youth signify for Asia's future?
Well, one, we know the demographic dividend, right? The majority of young people will be in Asia and Africa.
Yeah.
Given that either it goes to massive unemployment, meaning violence or depression, or it goes to Asian youth become entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, they create different futures. So with that demographic dividend, then you have a wealth increase throughout the country, not just financial wealth, but social wealth. So the youth futures is foundational for a new Asia. Now, in a condition of artificial intelligence, meaning the end of jobs as we know it, or at least the end of traditional jobs, young people create new jobs using new technologies. If we don't do that, we'll have unemployed young people. So that's kind of one main wave. The second wave is, as you mentioned, the rise of females. If the traditional model was follow Confucius, follow your father, follow your husband, follow your brother, the new model, wait a second, I can create my own futures. So we're seeing the rise of females throughout Asia. Now some people say, yeah, but I said, well, the reason why this will continue is the economic incentive is there. Very clear research. For example, boards that have a better gender balance are more productive. They make wiser decisions, more robust decisions. Research after the global financial crisis clearly suggested firms that had female managers did better. So over and over, we're seeing countries, firms, institutions that have gender balance, they're more productive, and they're better places to be. So the economic calculus and the social calculus suggests the rise of women is not a minor trend, it's a major global disruption. So the metaphor we use, a bird can't fly on one wing. So you cannot have national development on one wing. A bird can't fly, so everyone benefits. Now, of course, some people get really upset, right? So you have, in fact, the wave we're seeing today is people want to control the female body, women's rights. And so that's an attempt to say, we see this wave of change and we don't like it. So that's the tension we're in now. Global politics today are essentially about how do we react to the rise of females globally. That's to me the core variable.
Okay, so Sohail, surely you must have studied Pakistan through the lens of future studies. So what do you make of that? Would you say that Pakistan is living in a used future?
In terms of what I've seen in terms of patterns of Pakistan, there's a pendulum shift back and forth, often between multiple and you might say unitary. So you see this shift back and forth until in terms of what counts as politics. So the goal is to get out of this pendulum back and forth. So part of what needs to be done, and I don't want to be prescriptive here because this is people living locally, need to say, okay, what futures do we want? So that's the imagination part. How do we want Pakistan to look like in 2050? That's the first step. The second step is then, do we have an appropriate metaphor? Do we have the capability to move towards there? The youth future is fighting against everyone else. I understand the geopolitics, right? Security issues, safety issues, peace through strength, but that means basically weaponization, and that means money doesn't go for entrepreneurship, for wealth creation. So the futures in this sense is saying, what future do you want in 2050 or 2040? And then what are the skill sets, what are the capabilities we need to create that? So right now, I think you're right, it is a used future, it's a security-based future instead of an enhanced cooperative future. And I can see my friends in security studies saying, yeah, but this is a dangerous place. That may be the case, but still the deeper issue, what society do we wish to live in?
Okay.
And there's a tension there as always between what Pakistanis might want and of course what the external environment might wish. But the first step is taking agency back. Here's the future we wish, what are the trade-offs we wish to create? And do we have a narrative that empowers each Pakistani, or do we have a narrative that blames others? So that's a tough choice. Most people prefer to blame others. It takes strength to say, wait a second, here's the future we want, let's focus, let's develop and create it.
Yeah. So considering the questions that the Pakistan State of Future Index suggests, what do you see as the biggest challenges that Pakistan right now faces?
Well, in the short term, it's the same ones, right? Access to clean water, access to health, access to infrastructure. That's the basic stuff. So that's kind of horizon one. How do we make sure that's there, for the nation? So then you start to ask yourselves, are we putting money in the right places in terms of solar renewables, or are we putting money in terms of fossil fuels? So that's the basic. Part two then is the social part, social well-being, social harmony, and the horizon three is again what we talked about earlier, the preferred vision of the future. So what I like about the State of Future Index is actually measuring multiple variables. If we want to change the world, we can't use yesterday's indicators. GDP only measures GDP. It doesn't, so if we want a different future, we have to have a different measurement. So work we've done in East Asia is intriguing because they were measuring gross national cool. So that's measuring the coolest industries, then you're measuring, in fact, creativity. You're measuring investment into media, investment into drama. You're seeing creativity enhancing national productivity.
Yeah.
Or do you want to go towards gross national happiness? So we can't create a different future if we measure the past. So what I like about SOFI is actually, here's some multiple measures that can track us as we move forward. So that's very clever and is to be embraced.
Okay, so right now, what do you see as the major challenges for the global future, and what would you suggest policymakers can do to work around those challenges?
Taking a long-term historical view, the two big ones is the contradiction between governance and I would say local conditions, generally around climate change and economic well-being. So more and more we're seeing if our governance is national but our problems are global, how do we design global governance systems where the local is enhanced?
Yeah.
Right now the systems are all at the nation-state level. It's hard to get ministers, prime ministers to agree at the national level when the problem, for example, of violence, of crime, the problem of climate change are global. So these are governance issues. That's what we're starting to imagine. What would an Asia where there's a confederation look like? What would a confederation of South Asia look like? So moving them outside of nation-state suggestions to higher up and also local. Now, for some people that's difficult, but as we bring in smartphones, new digital technologies, the local can become global. Accessibility, being in touch with people all over the world, for example. In fact, using predictable parts of technology to see, here's how climate is changing. Here's what could happen to my crops. So it's using these new technologies to give us real-time information. So right now the technologies are, of course, not equally accessible. We want to make them accessible so we can leapfrog over what we might say the Industrial Revolution to some new type of revolution. So the challenge is governance that supports P2P, peer-to-peer without the middleman, governance that supports global solutions, governance that supports local solutions. So often these are governance issues. Now, when I work with ministers, with political leaders, they say, that's interesting. Why should we embrace the future 20 years from now? We just want to get reelected.
Yeah.
So that becomes the tension. How do we give a political leader enough incentive to purchase a vision if that may lead to them not getting reelected? So I go to the personal. So I ask political leaders, okay, for example, here's the data we have on crime, on pollution. So you're walking in 2040 with no change. What does that look like? So one mayor said, well, I'm walking, it's polluted, I can't breathe, I may get mugged. I said, do you want that future? He goes, no. So I said, now let's look at some other seeds of change. What if you invested in green technology? What if all the buildings had solar? What if there were organic farms? What if you invested in taking care of the elderly? What does your city look like now? He said, it's safe, it's green, I'm walking. There's green spaces everywhere. So now he suddenly has personally experienced two different futures. Then it comes to budget time. And this mayor gave a speech. He said, based on that, he made political decisions that in fact saved green lands for future generations. And this was supported by running visioning workshops with thousands of citizens. So he could resist the short-term need to get rid of green areas for the long-term need for future generations. And we know the more green canopy we have, temperatures drop, well-being is higher, pollution drops. So this way, by personalizing the future, he could make wiser decisions and have political governance structures that supported him.
So mindsets that reinforce individual responsibility.
That's part of it. So part of it, foresight, we were talking about from prediction to alternatives to agency. But underneath that is a narrative. So every person has a life story. And part of foresight work is, does my life story match my vision of the future? So I ran a workshop for young kids a few years ago. And there was one girl, she said, by 25, I want to be the CEO of this food company. I said, fantastic. That's her vision, right? Then we asked her, what is your narrative today? And she said, my life is like the curtains are shut. So I said, and what does that mean? That means I don't connect with friends. I don't connect with people. I don't allow novel information into my life. So I want to be a CEO by 25, but I don't allow novel information. So her narrative, while authentic and true, didn't help her get to her future. So then she changed her narrative to let the sun shine in. If my new metaphor is let the sun shine in, what does that mean in terms of strategy? It means I look for information. I look for wisdom. I talk to my friends. I develop a peer-to-peer network. So often the key is, in terms of creating wiser futures, better futures, is to ask ourselves, is my core life metaphor, the things I say over and over, are they helping me create my national vision, my personal vision, the national possibility? So every country also has a national metaphor. So people are living not the future they want, they're living their unconscious story. Our role in futures is to make that unconscious story conscious, then to ask the tough question, do you wish to continue that story? If not, what's a better narrative? And often people choose a victim narrative because there's real good reasons. People are actually victimized. So empirically, they're correct. Structurally, they're correct. But is that narrative helping them create a different future? So then we try to change the narrative. Now, to sustain it, there has to be systemic change. So the mayor wants a future where everyone is safe, where there's green buildings. Now then, he has to incentivize and finance that future. It's story plus strategy. Most people have the wrong story and a strategy based on what you said earlier on a used future. We want a strategy based on the novel future and a story, a kahani, that supports that.
Okay, so we're personalizing futures to create a better global future.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Thank
each
you.
person figures out their narrative, and as a planet, what's the new planetary story?
Thank you for joining us, Sohail. As the facts suggest, disruption and innovation will occur. The issue is whether Pakistan will be a part of that change or not. Thanks for watching. This is Parisey, Tariq, and I'll see you again soon.